we got the question on Instagram, what is the correct way to engage your abs? And I thought, this is a wonderful question. I love overthinking things, so obviously it's a perfect one to address. The answer, unfortunately, is not going to be do X, Y, Z, because that answer is going to change for each person. All right, so let's dive into this a little bit deeper and see if we can unpack it some. All right, so it's going to depend on what is weak in your body and how we're going to address that weakness. So some people have extremely weak external obliques. Some people have extremely weak internal obliques. Some people have extremely weak TAs, and some people, believe it or not, the rectus is actually weak. All right, so what I'm going to look at from a physical therapy standpoint is what is weak, what are we trying to essentially catch up to balance strength, and then we're going to go from there. So that's going to be our emphasis and our focus during exercise. So the first thing you have to do is figure out, do you have great balance between your abdominal muscles, or is one thing tend to be a little bit weak? A couple ways you can tell is, what does your rib cage angle look like? So if your rib cage angle sits really wide and open, that's tending to tell me, hey, maybe you're a fairly dominant internal oblique person. Maybe your external obliques are fairly weak. If your rib cage is fairly narrow, maybe your external obliques tend to be fairly dominant. Internal obliques might be a little bit weak. What about segmental TAs too? Because we have 3 segments to our TAs, upper, middle, and lower. What if you tend to be somebody who likes to cinch the middle but pooch at the bottom and have that belly pooch? Well, that's telling me, wow, your middle TAs really like to show up. We're gonna need to calm those things down. So I'm gonna be real careful with wanting to cue middle TAs during exercise. So that drawing in maneuver, I'm going to want to be real careful with cueing that if you already have a tendency to overuse this. And then I'm going to want to try to get lower TAs to pick up the slack, and then maybe see if we can balance lower TA strength with external oblique strength, because that can often be something that's really hard to balance. And if it's not balanced, it can tend to lead to too much pressure down on the pelvic floor. So that was an amazing question. And I think with diving into a lot more study about your body and what your body needs, you can find exactly the right way in that moment that would be the best to engage your abs. Now, as an overall general rule, you don't want to have pooching out, okay? So let me just dive into that a little bit more. All right, so if I'm gonna say do crunches, which I know crunches, whatever, but I still feel like you can probably do crunches if you want to do crunches safely. All right, so if you go to do a crunch and you go up and you notice your belly pooches out, it gets bigger, you notice this pooching in the bottom, that's obviously something we don't want. As a general rule of thumb, when you go to load your abs, we don't want them pooching out, getting bigger, or forming like poochy lower belly pooching in that, because that tells me there's a pressure management problem. If you get doming or tenting out of your linea alba, that's telling me there's a pressure management problem when you go to load your abs, okay? So that's just a little bit of rule of thought. If you feel like, okay, things can stay relatively flat, they can stay contracted. When I load, I don't feel tremendous pressure down or out, then you're probably doing a pretty good job. But then we're gonna wanna look at that rib cage and also what's happening with those internal and external obliques. Okay, so hopefully that made things, at least give you a little bit more thought when it comes to abdominal work. So it's not just, here, do this workout, because one size never fits all. Okay, and this is why you might notice there's a lacking of online rehab programs, is because as physical therapists, it's very overwhelming sometimes to be like, what should I do, without assessing the person, because there is a lot of variation in the human body, and sometimes a generic approach works, but in a lot of cases, if you feel like you're really hitting roadblocks and you're really struggling and you're not getting the results you're looking for, it means you probably need somebody to take a look at your body and figure out what's going on, and then give you the right direction to go into that might be different from somebody else. All right, so happy abdominal work.